Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kata Beilin. Welcome to the lecture in our series Maya Living Legacy, Inspiring Future Pathways that we have organized a year ago with my colleagues from the Department of Anthropology, plant scientists, linguistics, so a very interdisciplinary group. I should say thank you to all our sponsors. There are too many of them to be mentioning all their names right now, but you can read their names on our posters. And right now, just not to lose any more time because we have very limited time today, I would like to introduce very briefly today's speaker, Professor Charles Pigott. He's a lecturer at the University Strathclyde and author of this book that I have been reading a little by little and always enjoying. I think it's one of the best criticism of Maya contemporary culture. Writing the Land, Writing Humanity, the Maya Literary Renaissance. And I also want to mention that number of Professor Pigott's analysis are very close to the way that I read the texts and contemporary culture. So I have an enormous pleasure of welcoming him today. And before I pass the word to him, I also wanted to add that he does not only specializes in Maya culture. So I hear that he's spending a lot of time in Mayab recently, but he also knows and works on Nahuatl and the Andean cultures, and I believe he speaks Quechua and Nahuatl as well. Is that right, Charles?
Yes, well, I'm learning. Estoy en el camino.
So, without further ado, I would like to pass the word to Professor Pigott, and we will listen to his lecture about Maya Renaissance in relation to the environmental thought that also connects me to Professor Pigott.
Well, thank you very, very much, Kata. It's a real pleasure to be invited today, and thank you to all those who managed to make it. So I'm just going to share my slides here. Just bear with me while I do that. Okay, so hopefully you can now see my slides on the screen. Okay, so I would also like to thank the Leverhulme Trust and the Isaac Newton Trust, who funded part of this research through a Leverhulme Early Career Fellowship at the Centre of Latin American Studies, University of Cambridge. I'd like to begin with a poem written in the Yucatan Maya language by Felipe Koch-Canul. I'm going to read it in Maya, but here you have my English translation on the right-hand side. Te Maya, tulla kalba al-kuk ai, tulla kalba al-kut chen ba'ale, yanu kan bal ta'al-ku'uya, utia al-ka-na'ata. Felipe Koch-Canul's poem forms part of a cultural phenomenon that is sweeping across the Yucatan Peninsula, or Maya, of southeast Mexico, and that can be described as a Maya literary renaissance. Since the last quarter of the 20th century, there has been a growing number of Maya language writers who have produced poetry, songs, novels, and plays bilingually between Yucatec Maya and Spanish. Rather than understanding Renaissance only in the Western sense of returning to an imagined golden age of the past, I interpret ka'asihil, or rebirth, in the Mesoamerican sense of the life cycle, where each age draws on the sustenance of past years in a form of continuity and transformation at the same time. In the poem's conclusion, Koch Kanul emphasizes how humanity cannot truly inhabit the land unless we open ourselves to the non-human voices around us. While u'ui, in the penultimate line, is often translated as escuchar, or to listen, it actually incorporates a range of senses, indicating a perceptual and corporeal openness that results in understanding. I consider this perceptual openness to be a hallmark of the contemporary literary movement in Maya, in such a way that it invites a reconceptualization of what it means to be human, and a reconsideration of literature as emergent from the dialogue between human and non-human forms, rather than as the product of the human mind in isolation from its environment. It's in this sense that I see the movement as a ka'asihil, a rebirth or renaissance of the imagination. In this talk, I want to suggest 3 key points. The first one is that Maya literature is also universal literature. The fact that Maya literature emerges from culturally specific concepts, perceptions, and philosophies in no way precludes it from being universal literature at the same time. In fact, the reverse is true. It's the very groundedness in lived realities that makes this literature so powerful at a wider human level. Maya author Wildernain Villegas and Donald Frischman have made similar points in the edited publication Usud Am, or The Return of Our Word. The second point is that one of the ways that Maya literature is both grounded in the immediate context and also universal is through a pervasive focus on the human body in interaction with the non-human environment. And the third point is that the Maya language, like all languages, offers powerful theoretical concepts which can both challenge and complement those in Western languages. To make these points, I'll take as a case study 2 poems which explore the interaction between the human body and the non-human environment, even to the point of reversing or dissolving the distinction between habitat and inhabitant. I'll interpret the poems in the light of a Maya theoretical framework which draws on 2 key concepts, which are tsikbal and tzib. I introduced part of this framework in my book, Writing the Land, Writing Humanity, the Maya Literary Renaissance, which was published by Routledge in 2020. But this is a preliminary analysis of the poems themselves, which are more recent. So what do tsikbal and tzib mean? Well, tsikbal can be defined in many ways, as story, as conversation, and even as gossip or chisme. In his book, Telling and Being Told, Storytelling and Cultural Control in Contemporary Yucatec Maya Literatures, Paul Worley describes how even as stories, Tzikbal are, quote, dialogic, implying the participation of both storyteller/author and listener/reader in the performative act, close quotes. Tzikbal is also a research methodology that has been developed by Maya scholars, particularly Juan Castillo-Cocón and his colleagues at the Universidad Intercultural Maya de Quintana Roo. And here I quote from Wilder Naín Villegas's MA dissertation, Scala Ansonie del Pichito, Danza, Palabra y Metáfora. And this is an English translation from the Spanish. Tzikbal is not just to obtain answers, but to establish a closer connection with the interlocutor. With the term Tzikbal, we erase the context of the informant, which separates, placing the researcher in a seemingly superior position, and the informant as a simple object of study from which information derives. In Tzikbal, both are dialogic agents, and it is through this interaction that knowledge is constructed. If we recall Felipe Coccanul's poem at the beginning, we can see that the principle of Tzikbal can also be applied beyond the human realm to include our interactions with non-human elements of our environment. As the poet says, we must open our perception to the multiple voices in our surroundings if we are to understand properly. The other Maya concept I want to draw on is tz'i, which is usually translated as writing, but has a much wider meaning. In their book, Unwriting Maya Literature, tz'i as Recorded Knowledge, Paul Worley and Rita Palacios describe how tz'i entails, quote, a multimodal indigenous understanding of text, close quote. The authors explain how even agriculture can be interpreted as a form of tz'i, since it creates patterns on the landscape. In their article, Text and Textile, Language and Technology in the Arts of the Quiché Maya, Barbara and Dennis Tedlock explained that tz'i includes, quote, figures, designs, and diagrams in general, whether they be drawn, painted, engraved, embroidered, or woven, close quotes. So it's clear that Tzikbal and tz'i don't fit neatly into the Western binary between orality and writing, because Tzikbal can be stories or conversations that take place both verbally and in writing, while tz'i includes but goes beyond writing and even beyond a purely human context, as in the case of agriculture. The way I interpret the two terms is as two polarities in a cyclical relationship. Tzikbal can be understood as the playful, spontaneous interactions that give rise to new relationships, patterns, or forms of understanding. These new forms can be interpreted as tz'i or inscriptions, which need not be physical, but that leave their trace, su huella, and serve as a basis from which new interactions can emerge as future tzikbal, repeating the cycle. The wide semantic orbit of Tsigbal as conversation, story, gossip, and more reflects this transition from openness, playfulness, spontaneity to greater fixity, while the equally varied definitions of Tsib reflect the contingency of patterns that emerge, which can either dissolve in new forms of Tsigbal or be reinforced by them. So at this point, let's just remind ourselves of the three key points I want to make in this talk. First, the fact that Maya literature speaks to universal themes while being grounded in local contexts and realities, and there is no contradiction between the two. Second, one of the ways it bridges the immediate and the universal is through a focus on the human body and its interaction with the non-human environment. And third, this interaction can be interpreted through Maya theoretical concepts, which have universal import. And I'd like to suggest that the dual terms of Tsigbal and Tsib can be deployed to interpret this interaction between body and environment. So Tsigbal could be interpreted as the lateral, the spatial form of this interaction as it's happening in the moment. It's when the wind blows against our skin, or when we hear a grackle call from the top of a tree. It's what can take us by surprise, alert our senses, and provoke a response, a dialogue. Tsib could be understood as the longitudinal, temporal trajectory that results from these more spontaneous interactions. It's when we inscribe ourselves into the landscape through new emergent patterns, when we develop sustained bodily responses to stimuli, when habitual processes result from the cumulative effects of diverse manifestations of Tsigbal. These patterns can vanish almost before they've begun, such as when we cease to notice the call of the grackle because of another distraction, or they can become long-lasting, such as when people come to associate seasonal patterns of bird calls with meteorological phenomena. In the context of the Yucatan Peninsula, or Maya, I interpret the cyclical interaction between Tsib and Tsigbal as what I call bioregional becoming, which draws on the concept of the bioregion. And Robert Thayer defines this as follows: a unique region, definable by natural rather than political boundaries, with a geographic, climatic, hydrological, and ecological character capable of supporting unique human and non-human living communities. The Mayab epitomizes this definition. As a giant slab of limestone, it has given rise to unique wildlife, unique cultural phenomena, and a distinct branch of the Maya linguistic family. It also stretches across 3 Mexican states, as well as part of Belize and Guatemala. And one of the characteristic features of the peninsula are the cenotes, tzonot, or sinkholes, such as this one at Chichen Itza, and this is mentioned in one of the poems that we will be exploring. Now, the advantage of Thayer's definition in terms of analyzing Maya nature writing is that it presents humanity as just one element of the land itself, rather than separate from it. And to complement Thayer's definition, I'd like to lay greater focus on the evolving dynamic nature of bioregions to avoid risking a static or essentializing perspective. As a result, I propose the term bioregional becoming, or el devenir bioregional, which conveys the temporal aspect that cannot be separated from space or place. As Thayer's definition illustrates, a bioregional perspective incorporates humanity as part of the wider regional network. Accordingly, I view contemporary Maya literature as part and parcel of the bioregional becoming of the peninsula. In other words, the literature is not just a representation of the land, but an integral part of its evolution, constituting a phenomenon that is deeply embedded in local, cultural, and ecological relationships, while not being confined within regional borders. So, to recap briefly, I see the cyclical interaction between tsikbal, or dialogue, and tsib, or inscription, habit, as part and parcel of bioregional becoming. I'll now attempt to sketch how this framework can help us interpret two concrete examples of Maya poetry. This is a very preliminary analysis with the aim of testing ideas, so it will be very helpful to hear comments and suggestions during the Q&A session. Both poems explore diverse aspects of corporeality and landscape, to the point where body and environment merge or are even reversed. So the first book I want to present was published just last month, and which I was able to purchase a copy of at the Filet, or the International Literature Festival of Yucatan in Mérida a couple of weeks ago. So this is hot off the press. And this is the book here. This is the book I'm going to speak about. It's beautifully put together. It's called Chacnul in Water, or Mi piel desnuda, and it incorporates 10 female Maya poets who pertain to the cultural group Xcusamo, which translates as golondrinas, or swallows, which incidentally is also the origin of the name Cozumel, the island just off the Yucatan, the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. It translates as place of swallows. And the prefix sh, or x, in Xcusamo indicates the female gender. The book was coordinated by Maria Elisa Chavarria Chin and published by Capulin Taller Editorial. And according to the introduction, the idea was initially proposed by Mariana Gonzalez, the founder of Nepantla Atelier. It's published in 3 languages, in Maya, Spanish, and German, with the Maya and Spanish texts by the same bilingual writers, and the German translation by Jasmine Vasquez. The compilation explores eroticism and the human body from a female perspective. In the introduction, the author states that the book nos lleva a reflexionar que nuestros cuerpos también son territorios. Es nuestro territorio, es nuestro hábitat. El autocuidado forma parte importante de nosotras. It invites us to reflect that our bodies are also territories, our own territories, our own habitat, and that self-care is an important dimension of ourselves. So what I think is particularly interesting is the mention of the body as territory and habitat, suggesting a reversibility between habitat and inhabitants that recalls the French phenomenologist Maurice Merleau-Ponty's writings on the flesh as both sensing and sensed, such as when two hands touch each other, both sensing and sensed. And this is a principle which he extends, which Merleau-Ponty extends to the world at large, beyond even animate matter. Now, the poem I want to analyze is the first in the compilation, and it's entitled Cumul y Ilt'an, Nuestra Poesía Colectiva, Our Collective Poetry, and which, as its name suggests, is authored collectively by all participants, in contrast to the single authored poems in the rest of the book. It's quite a long poem, so I've just picked the final two stanzas, which most clearly reflect the interaction between body and landscape. So here I'm going to share again. So hopefully everyone can see the slides again. So I'm going to read it out in Maya, but you've got my English translation on the right-hand side. Now, I've deliberately chosen to draw on both the Maya and the Spanish version for my translation, with the aim of illustrating the contrast between the two versions, because often in bilingual indigenous literature, the Spanish version doesn't exactly coincide with what's in the Maya. Sometimes it can be quite different. And I see the dialogue between the two languages as itself a form of tzikbal, rather than one necessarily being more original than the other. So here we go. In what ele sha'ai man sha'ai be, hut ani ma shimbalti, kash beho ku bisik u yolma u chambel shimbalte, nunul beho ku yasik u yolma naaka u shimbalte. Cho'ot beho ku satik u yolma ko obi, hanil be ku yesik tulakal u hatsutzil, loba anbe u shiwi lo obe, ku mukli u hach chuhuki u tonot hobmer. Inwot ele eko ku tsol mahuba, ku tepik eko cheeni, ku pishik u yahilo o in pishan. Shmukult an ku balik shmukul tsikbal. Ku yayanti ka baik abtaat. Yok olka minaan ushul ki ora. So here in the first part that I've quoted, the start of the penultimate stanza, the skin in Wotele is equated with the land, the paths, the bed, which are crisscrossed or have multiple forks. Sha'ai is a fork in the road. So this hints already at a reversibility between the habitat and the inhabitant, between the skin and the land. And here the romantic act is interpreted as a form of inhabitation, whereby the skin stroke land speaks to whomsoever journeys over it. And here we see a contrast between the Maya and the Spanish versions. So in the third line here, this doesn't actually correspond to the third line in the poem. It's just that the formatting that means that what is on a different line to sha'ai, man sha'ai, but this is all one line. But here in the third line in the PowerPoint, anik means to speak to. So we have a focus very much on dialogue, which isn't actually in the Spanish version. The Spanish version says invitan a ser recorridas, or which I've translated loosely as beckon the traveler. Then on the next line down, we have tash becho, or the flat land is tash and the bech is the parts. So really evoking the unique geography of the peninsula, again equated with the skin. And bisiku bisik, that is the transitive form of the verb to go, which is been. So here it carries roughly the meaning of carries or transports or takes with it. So what's interesting here is that it's the land stroke skin that carries the traveler. And it's not only the traveler that has agency over the land, but movement is reciprocal interaction between the habitat and the inhabitant, a form of dialogue. Then on the next line down, we have the word yol. Now the all is very difficult to translate into Western languages. But in his article, La noción de persona entre los mayas, una visión semántica, the anthropologist Gabriel Bourdin notes how all is a kind of essence that is associated with the core of a plant. And it's what allows the plant to grow upwards and outwards. In the human context, the all is the seat of understanding and emotions, and it can be roughly glossed as heart, spirit, or essence. So then at the bottom of this slide, we have the phrase tonot hobnel. Tonot is the cenote, which I showed you a picture of earlier on, the sinkholes that characterize much of the peninsula. The photograph was the cenote in Chichen Itza. And this is because the peninsula is entirely formed of limestone. So particularly in the north of the peninsula, you don't have surface rivers because the water sinks through the limestone. But there are many, many rivers in the peninsula. It's just that they're underground. And what's interesting about this phrase is that it again suggests a reversibility between the feature of the landscape and the human body, because in Maya, hobnel translates as entrañas in Spanish, which means the bowels or the entrails, the innards. And the hyphen here, in my mind, suggests a conceptual continuity, a sense of inseparability between the habitat and the inhabitant. There is interesting parallelism here in the Maya version, which isn't rendered in the Spanish, but shmukult an kubalik shmukul tzipal. So shmukul is hidden, so hidden language, which conceals hidden dialogues, or hidden speech, which conceals hidden dialogues or conversations or stories. In the Spanish version, it's really quite different. It's rendered as susurro de secretos escondidos, or whisper of hidden secrets. But the Maya version here highlights the tzikbal, or the conversation, or the dialogue. And here we see the intertwining of the hidden depths of a human being, all of the stories and experiences that form who we are, not just our own, but even genetically from our ancestors. The intertwining of our personal stories with the hidden stories of the peninsula, the geology, the geography that are revealed in the fossil record deep below the surface. And then in the penultimate line, in the last line, Yok olkab mina anu shul ki olal. Here, the poem goes from the skin stroke land to the world at large. Yok olkab, literally above the earth, which in the Spanish version is rendered as universo. In the Maya language, Yok olkab is often translated as the earth or the world or the planet. So the poem goes from the most immediate, intimate situation to speak of the universal. So throughout these two stanzas, we can see the sense of reversibility between habitat and inhabitant, between body and land, through a mutual interaction, or tzikbal, that imaginatively inscribes, or tzibtik, new patterns of dwelling between human beings and between humans and the landscape. We can also see how the poem speaks of local geographies and intimate relationships to speak of and to the world at large, illustrating the universal appeal of contemporary Maya literature. Now, the second poem I want to discuss today is by a friend of mine, Wildernayin Villegas. And let me see if I can just get the link up here so I can show you also the website where you can get a copy of the book. Here we are. So the title is Utzibil obchaquietel, or in Spanish, Los escritos de la lluvia y el viento, the writings of the rain and the wind. Wildernayin Villegas, the author, is a lecturer at the Intercultural Maya University of Quintana Roo. And for the past 4 weeks, Wildernayin and I have been collaborating on a project in local communities in the vicinity of Jose Maria Morelos, training school pupils to write poetry in the Maya language in an effort to stimulate the next generation of creative writers in Maya. And the work has been supported by the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council through a grant that was awarded to the principal investigator of the project, Paul McAleer, at the University of Hull. We had the honor of publishing Wildernayin's book in the series Literatura en Lenguas Originarias, or Literature in Indigenous Languages, which I co-founded along with Martín Sánchez Camargo, a lecturer at the Universidad de las Américas Puebla, and Martín Tonalmeotl, an acclaimed writer in Nahuatl. The series is published by the Universidad de las Américas Puebla, and so far has published 4 poetry books in Nahuatl, Totonac, Zapotec, and Maya, with Wildernayin's book coming out in 2023. Utzibil obchaquietel is written in the style of a single long poem, with one half devoted to the rain and the other to the wind. Each half is divided into different sections. And the title itself draws on the Maya concept of t'ib, rendered as escritos or writings in the Spanish version, los escritos. The suffix il in t'ibil indicates inalienable possession, together with the third person possessive u t'ibilo, indicates that writing is not just about the rain and the wind. Instead, it's of these natural elements that actually do the t'ib themselves. They inscribe themselves onto the bioregional landscape. And this invokes a much wider concept of writing than in a purely human or linguistic sense. But it's closer to the notion of inscription, which in the Maya context can arguably be performed by both human and non-human beings. So I'm going to read out just the very beginning of Wildernaim's poem, and I'll just find the slides here and share them with you again. So this is a very, very tiny excerpt. So again, you've got my English translation on the right and the Maya on the left. I figured it would be too complicated to include the Spanish version as well. So, kene haen, wolis okoten, kincenti tu hobonil innak pushitil kuho. Kene ik eleniumtil in kukule umantat te ushiko. Masho binu yu ubeno obe, yanu kaholtiko, uhum ukal bek ech ini. Uspil pasho yetel tunkulo. Yanin walka tikam el celilo, kaanal yetel kaba. Yanu sihil winiko binyo helto tsipal tinwekel. Yetel bin as paktaak menka. Baale ken shuulu in shimbalti kolo obe. Yanu nats al tio yetel muk ya. So here, water itself, or the rain itself, is the poetic subject. And the rain describes itself as a dance, a circular dance, wolis okoten. So okot here is the dance, and the suffix en indicates the first person. So I am dance, literally. So of course, dancing is normally seen as a human endeavor. But here, the fact that it's the rain that dances and even speaks, saying that it's the dancer, conveys the sense that the human creative capacity of dancing comes from wider creative patterns in nature, because the rain is dancing in the wind, and human culture is itself inspired by creative patterns in the wider natural world. But the line, I think, could also be read as the reversibility between the human inhabitant, or the dancer, and the non-human habitat, such that the habitat becomes the inhabitant. The qualities are transferred from one to the other. The two almost dissolve and merge in a kind of tsikbal. On the next line down, kin tsentik ik, the verb tsentik means to nurture or to rear or to raise. And this, in my mind, communicates the sense that the whole of nature is animate. Now, the ik, the word after tsentik, has a variety of meanings. It can be translated as the wind, but also breath. And in fact, in the Spanish version, what's interesting is that Wildernayin doesn't render ik as wind, as one might expect, but as aliento, or breath. And I think this says something really interesting about the bilingual nature of contemporary Maya literature, because one might expect the Spanish version to be a diluted version of the Maya. But I find that this isn't always the case, because sometimes the Spanish version can actually pinpoint the precise meaning of the Maya term. So the fact that ik is pinpointed or specified as aliento reinforces again this sense of animacy or reversibility between habitat and inhabitant. And one word for poetry is ik il an, or the language of the breath. Perhaps it could also be translated as the language of the wind. So in the next line down, we have again the word hobon, or the innards or entrails or the bowels, which we saw in the previous poem. In that poem, hobon was equated with the cenote, but here it's equated with the center of the rainstorm. And it's the real center because nap, in the word nap, connotes or denotes the area of the stomach. So it's the center of the center. But these are all corporeal characteristics. So the rain acquires bodily characteristics, suggesting again this merging of the habitat and the inhabitants. Another example is iik, so iik elen, the blood of the, so iik is the blood, and the phrase iik elen yuntil means the blood of the earth guardians, the spiritual guardians who take care of fields and forests and who need to be respectfully engaged with if agriculture is to be successful. On this slide, we have the sense again that human creativity emerges from wider creative patterns in nature. So those that listen to me, will come to know, will learn the voice of fine chords, of ocarinas, and drums or tun. So again, this sense that creativity or music is not entirely the province of human beings, but comes from this dialogue between the human and the non-human. And then at the bottom of the slide, we have the mention of the four sides of the world. Now, traditionally, in Maya thought, there are actually 5 points to the compass. There's the four sides of the world, plus the central point in the middle, which can be interpreted as the location of each individual, which is relative. So there's no absolute center. Instead, geography emerges from the inhabitants. Time and space emerges from the all, a concept which we saw earlier on. So ultimately, space and time are always a matter of perspective. So there's a very dialogic interpretation of geography here. And from the rain standpoint, the rainfall itself is the center, and it extends itself to the whole world. space and time emerge from bodily movement. Then we have the phrase tsikbal tinwetel. So people will be born who know how to tsikbal with me, who know how to converse with me. And this alludes to the agricultural rituals that I mentioned earlier, that are often performed as menoob, or ritual specialists, who in many ways play a mediating role between the agriculturalist and the yumtsiloob, or the guardians of the land. The stanza here mentions part of the contemporary reality, which is that because of cultural change, there is often discrimination against Maya speakers and the practitioners of these ancient rituals, which means that many people are even reluctant to acknowledge their fluency in the Maya language, even though, of course, being born bilingual is a tremendous advantage, because of legacies of discrimination. People are often reluctant to acknowledge this. And this did come across fairly frequently. Just recently, when Wildernayan and I were working in local communities, but I can say that it didn't take long at all for people to regain a sense of pride in the language during the workshops themselves. So this dialogue, or tsikbal, between humanity and the natural elements is what enables the world to flourish. And this is also a strong theme in the Popol Vuh. In his chapter, Who Shall Be a Sustainer?, Alan Christensen notes how the Popol Vuh gives human beings a unique role as sustainers of the gods, acting as mediators between the gods and the earth. We can question the term gods as well, which I don't think, although we all use this term, I don't think it necessarily captures the essence of Maya philosophy, but that's something that can be discussed. So I'd argue that this mediating role can also be interpreted through the lens of tsikbal, or dialogue. And then we have the word shimbaltik. So shimbaltik kolo obe, the kol is the milpa, or the field, and shimbal connotes movement, or denotes movement. It's often translated as to walk, so in this case, to walk across the fields. But because it's rain, and the rain doesn't really walk horizontally, it can be understood more as move across, or move over the fields. But again, this continues the theme of fusing corporeality, or the body, with the land. Again, suggesting this merging of habitat and inhabitant. So to conclude, in this talk, I have argued that the Maya literary renaissance, or Ka'asihi, demonstrates the potential of literature not only to represent the world, but also to constitute it. Rather than being separate from the physical constitution of the Yucatan Peninsula or the Maya, these poetic works are part and parcel of the land's semiotic constitution, a process that continuously reconfigures the shifting parameters of humanity and non-humanity as a form of t'i, or inscription, that emerges from a wider dialogue, or tsikbal, in nature. One particularly powerful way that Maya literature partakes of this dialogue is through its exploration of the relationship between body and environment by sketching a preliminary analysis of two recently published poems. I have sought to demonstrate that the grounding of Maya literature in the bioregional characteristics of the Maya, in the immediacy and intimacy of human interactions with the landscape, is precisely what enables contemporary Maya authors to speak at a universal level. Nibolal Pulakalesh. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for this exciting lecture and the ideas, the translation, the poems. And I already have a question, but I don't want to take advantage of my privileged status here. So I'm going to open the session for questions to others. You can just unmute yourself and ask your question orally, or you can also type it, and maybe Addison could then find them and read if there are any questions. And while we are waiting, then I'm going to proceed with my question because right before the lecture, I talked to Alejandra Garcia Quintanilla, Maya anthropologist, who was going to attend your lecture, and she told me she's going to watch it on our YouTube channel. But she said, I'm not sure about this concept of universality, What do you actually mean? Could you place your universality in the context of debates about relativity, universality without uniformity? How do you understand that universality that you propose in your interpretation?
Yes, yes. Well, thank you. Thank you, Alejandra, for the question, and Kata as well. I don't really see any contradiction between universality and dialogue or relativity, because for me, universality isn't something that is over and above. It's something that emerges from dialogue. And I think that's something that comes across when we look at the human body in its relationship to the environment. Obviously, we will always be speaking from our particular position, from our particular bodily position in the world. But that doesn't preclude that positionality from resonating across the experiences of other people so that we can speak of humanity at large. So the way I see it, it's a bit like a cenote or an opening. I see Maya literature as emerging from a very specific context, but as speaking to the world at large, as offering new perspectives that aren't limited just to one particular context, but that can shed light on our human experience at a wider global level. So that's what I mean by universality. It's actually the opposite of the premise that universality and diversity sit in tension. It's much more the idea that universality emerges from the dialogue within diversity.
Very nicely put. I agree. Any questions? Do we have any other questions? Is there anything on chat? I think we have one. Is it going to be? No, it's just someone saying that's a great lecture and thanking you.
Yeah.
No more questions.
Hi. I can ask a question.
Yes, yes. Hello, Alicia.
Hi, thank you for that talk. It was I really like the whole dialectic between the poem and the landscape. Well, the bioregion, actually. So my question is about actually exactly that. Like, so what are the benefits of conceptualizing this inscription in the bioregion and not like necessarily on the land? And when you think about the bioregional using the concept of cuerpo territorio, body territory. So what is the scale that you have in mind when you're conceptualizing this bioregional body landscape or body land or body territory? I'm sorry, I'm using a lot of terms here.
No. Well, it's difficult to encapsulate within a particular term. I mean, I think for me, the advantage of the idea of bioregional becoming is that it grounds this literary movement in the specific context that it emerges from. And for me, the idea of the land, it's too, I don't know, it's too monolithic, it doesn't capture the diversity of different experiences on its own. I mean, obviously the land is a useful and necessary analytical term, but I think we need to show the diversity of different landscapes, the diversity of ways that human cultural phenomena emerge from the specificities of unique landscapes. And I think actually by showing the particularities of the bioregion, we can speak much more universally to how literature and art always emerge from a specific context, so that something that unites us so much as human beings is always rooted in diverse experiences. And of course, it's not just the land itself, because often we think of the land as the platform, and then the trees, the birds, the animals are on the land but not in the land. Whereas for me, bioregion encapsulates everything. Even when we leave the peninsula and carry the literature, the books with us, they still form part of the bioregion, even though they're not actually on the land itself. And that's the whole process of bioregional becoming.
Yes. So I liked a lot the idea that the literature is part of the becoming, because it also dialogues with the idea that books, language, literature are alive as well in Maya conceptualization. But with the bioregion, I would have a similar kind of doubt that Alicia had, and want to push a little further. Is there a concept in Maya that would correspond to bioregion? Because Lu'um or Ka'ash, no, these are kind of Mayab itself, no, the concept that you could kind of out from Maya thought itself. But bioregion seems like bioculturality, a concept that's brought from outside, that I would hear from Maya's, no, that's not that. Pushing towards the Maya conceptualization. So how do you situate your thinking in this Tsigbal, in this dialogue?
Yes. Well, precisely at Tsigbal, because I don't want to just limit myself to particular concepts from one particular area. I want to explore how these concepts themselves hold the potential to enter into dialogue with concepts from the outside, from beyond. So that's why I believe that conceptualizing the Mayab or Lu'um as bioregional becoming or bioregional expressions can help us to widen the dialogue, not in any way to limit the potency of these terms in Maya, but actually to enhance their potency to explore how they hold the tremendous potential of forging conceptual connections with terms in other languages across the globe. And that's why I choose to talk of bioregional becoming rather than the bioregion, precisely because the land, its semiotic constitution, its interpretation are always evolving, are always emerging from this dialogue, both within and beyond its boundaries.
Thank you. We can also ask questions in Spanish if someone would feel more open to that. Maybe not in Maya yet, but during the next lecture.
I actually have a question. Sorry. I don't know if
Two
Ramon had a
questions, Ramon and Lucia. We'll go with
Yeah.
Lucia and then we'll go to Ramon.
So I thank you for the talk. I really enjoy it. So I'm interested in language. So I'm studying so bilingualism, and I would like to like know how you see or like how Mayan communities see like language in relation to Tsigbal and Tsib. Like is something like more like as I understand like Tsigbal is more like it's more related to like the orality of like language trans it would be like seeing language as like oral stories transmitted through generations. And like Tsib is like yeah, I just kind of like I just kind of like put this framework of like these two concepts into language. So on language transmission through generations. So how do you see these relationships?
Yes, yes. Well, thank you very much for the question, Lucia. I think the way the terms are most commonly used, Sikbal would mean a conversation, it would mean story, possibly with more connotations of the spoken words, although there are also several published books that have Tsikbal or Tsikbalo'o in the title. So I wouldn't say that Tsikbal is purely oral and Tsib is entirely written. Although Tsib, again, the way that the terms are used most commonly is generally translated directly as writing. But if we explore historically the ways that these terms were used, and if we explore the way that people are theorizing these terms, then we can see that Tsib actually means much more than writing. It includes writing, but it's not restricted to writing. So I'd be wary of mapping the Western distinction between spoken language and written language onto Tsigbal and Tsib, even though vaguely the two terms may potentially point in those directions.
Ramon.
Hi Charles, Bichabel.
Ah, Bichabel, Ramon, denk que aqui no Milikech, ¿cómo estás? ¿Qué tal?
How are you? I'm really glad to see you. I want everyone.
Well, thanks. Yes. Yes, I hope you're keeping well too.
Okay. Charles,
Yes.
you know, normally Mayan writer and Mayan poet has to publish their book in Mayan and in Spanish in order to be read, because it's hard, it's harder to find a book written entirely in Mayan language, only in Mayan language. So the Mayan writer is really their own translator. Sometimes the Spanish translation doesn't convey the really meaning of Mayan words, because, well, if you write Kaan in Mayan language, that means cielo, sky, and you read it in the Spanish version, firmamento, a word nobody uses in real life except in literature. It's very difficult to convey this. I don't know how to say naivety or innocence that the Mayan language expresses with this word, And well, sometimes I have I don't know, mixed feelings about reading the Spanish translation. Obviously, the Spanish translation helps to understand if you don't speak Maya, if you don't know the Mayan language. But the Mayan language, it's sometimes very I don't know how to say this. Yes, candid. If you want, or I don't know, it's very innocent. And sometimes the Spanish translation doesn't reflect the real meaning of the Mayan text. So what do you think about this?
Yes, yes. I wouldn't necessarily say that the Maya text is more innocent, but I think that but I agree that there are certainly many moments where it's impossible to translate directly from Maya to a Western language. I actually see the bilingual nature of Maya literature as a kind of dialogue in itself. So I see the Spanish version not as limiting the Maya, but as opening up new expressive potential in the way that the Maya version does the same for the Spanish as well. So I see the bilingual nature of the literature as dos alas de la misma ave, no? As two wings of the same bird. And when both are joined, then they fly. That's in the case of bilingual literature. Obviously, monolingual literature in indigenous languages is self-sufficient in and of itself. But I do find the contrast between the Spanish and the Maya versions very interesting. And there are times when the Maya doesn't express what the Spanish version says, and there's times when the Spanish version doesn't express what the Maya version says. One language can actually pinpoint the meaning of the other. So I find it a fascinating instance of tzikbal, a fascinating instance of dialogue, rather than as a limitation. Although, of course, if we look at the history, then the bilingual reality does emerge from a situation where indigenous languages have been discriminated against, and that has to be recognized. But I feel that now with bilingual literature, the bilingual nature allows that literature to reach a more global audience. In fact, the Nahuatl author Martín Tonalmeotl talks of Spanish nowadays as being a puente, or a bridge, whereas before it was an instrument of domination. Now it can be used as an instrument of connection and dialogue between diverse indigenous literatures.
Okay, so any more questions in Spanish, in English? If not, I would like to say thank you so much for Charles for this presentation and for making us think about those very unique yet universal dialogues between bodies, landscapes, languages. And I would like to invite everyone for our next week lecture by Deira Jimenez Balam, precisely on Maya body healing and conceptualization of psychology in the context also of learning of Maya children. So thank you again to everyone, and see you next week, hopefully.
Thank you, Kata. And thank you to